What happens when a powerful woman, a U.S. Congresswoman, is treated like a criminal at an airport simply because of the color of her skin? Jasmine White, a dedicated public servant, was on her way to attend her cousin's funeral, exhausted after weeks of nonstop work, when she was subjected to a humiliating security check. Unjustly targeted, overlooked, and questioned. As Jasmine stood there, the world watched. Her calm demeanor hid the rage inside. But this wasn't just about her. This was about every person who's been treated unfairly for no reason other than who they are. Watch as Jasmine's fight for dignity unfolds, and witness what happens when the system breaks. Don't look away. This is a story that demands to be heard. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. How would you respond in her shoes? At the check-in counter, the young agent barely glanced up from his screen before looking back down with a slight smirk. Jasmine had encountered this behavior before, but something about it felt different today. She handed him her boarding pass and ID, maintaining her composure. "I just checked in an hour ago," she said, trying to keep her tone neutral, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tapped away at the keyboard, furrowing his brow. The seconds felt like minutes. Finally, he looked back at her. "Your seat's been changed," he said, his voice detached. Jasmine's heart skipped. This wasn't right. "Can you tell me why?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. The agent didn't answer, but motioned to another staff member. As the second agent approached, Jasmine's unease deepened. Her gut told her something was wrong. This wasn't just about a seating assignment anymore. She wasn't being treated like a regular passenger. She was being treated differently, wrongly. Revised Part 3. The second agent approached without a glance in Jasmine's direction. His voice was cold as he spoke. "You'll need to step aside for a random security check." Jasmine's mind raced. Random? She had traveled countless times without a hitch. This felt like something more. She took a deep breath, keeping her tone calm. "Can you explain why?" she asked, maintaining her composure. The agent barely acknowledged her, gesturing for her to step away from the counter. Jasmine's chest tightened, the unease in her gut now turning into frustration. As she moved aside, she could feel the eyes of the passengers around her, all whispering, some filming. She caught snippets of their conversations. "That's Congresswoman White, right?" But the attention from the crowd didn't matter. What mattered was the treatment she was receiving. She had no criminal record, no reason to be treated like this. A third agent arrived, barely looking at her as they checked her government ID, hardly giving it a second glance. "This is protocol," one of them said flatly, but Jasmine's patience was wearing thin. She wasn't going to stand there quietly and let them drag her through this without an explanation. As Jasmine stood off to the side, her arms crossed and jaw clenched, a sudden shift in the atmosphere made her look up. The airport's quiet murmur was interrupted by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps approaching. It was Franklin Rhodes, her husband, a former federal judge, and a man who commanded respect without needing to raise his voice. He stepped forward with quiet authority, his gaze scanning the situation before landing on Jasmine. He didn't need to ask what was going on. He already knew. The tension in the air grew thicker as he turned to the TSA agents. "What's the issue here?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. The young agent behind the counter seemed rattled by Franklin's presence. He fumbled with his words, trying to explain the situation, but Franklin wasn't having it. His eyes narrowed as he stepped closer to the counter, his stance unwavering. "You're holding my wife up without cause," he said, his tone sharp and precise. "This is a federal employee, not someone you can treat this way." Jasmine stood silently beside him, but her heart began to calm at the sight of Franklin. He was taking charge now. She could feel the agent's discomfort growing as Franklin's questions made them squirm. They had no answers, and it was becoming clear to everyone around that they were out of line. Jasmine's bag was placed on the counter, its contents spilling out like a display at a yard sale. Papers, toiletries, pens, and her carefully packed clothes all lay in front of the two white TSA agents. Their hands moved methodically, checking each item as if they were cataloging evidence, not the personal belongings of a U.S. Congresswoman. The harsh fluorescent lights above flickered slightly, casting long shadows on the counter. The bright white light illuminated the faces of the agents, but they barely glanced at Jasmine. Their attention was consumed by her things, not her. She stood there, her back straight and shoulders squared, but the pit in her stomach was growing. This wasn't random. This wasn't normal. She could feel the weight of their gaze, the subtle but undeniable tone in their movements. Jasmine had traveled countless times, never once being treated like this, and it hit her hard. She wasn't just being checked, she was being scrutinized. The first agent, a tall white man with a stony face, rifled through her papers with cold precision. He ignored her as if she were just another faceless passenger. He didn't even bother to check the details on her government-issued ID, though it was right there on the counter. Jasmine's gaze didn't leave him as he continued his invasive search. With every item he tossed aside, the sense of violation grew stronger. A simple tube of lotion, a notebook, her favorite pen, which she always carried to jot down thoughts in moments of quiet. None of these things were dangerous, yet here she was, subjected to this. Her thoughts were interrupted by the second agent, a young white woman with blonde hair, who was now taking out Jasmine's clothes with exaggerated care. The way she unfolded each piece, turning them over as if they were somehow suspicious, made Jasmine's skin crawl. She had become the object of their scrutiny, the target of their suspicion. The second agent didn't even look at her when she spoke. "It's protocol," she muttered flatly, as if Jasmine were just another inconvenience to be handled. Jasmine's stomach turned. Protocol, she thought, but she didn't speak the words aloud. She was too aware of the potential backlash, too aware of the role her calm demeanor played in maintaining some semblance of control in this chaotic moment. Franklin was standing a few feet away, watching silently, his arms crossed in a display of quiet frustration. He was the calm in the storm, the steady presence that balanced out Jasmine's growing unease. He didn't say a word, but his eyes never left the agents, as if silently challenging their every move. Jasmine felt a fleeting sense of gratitude for his support, but it didn't ease the weight pressing down on her chest. The seconds felt like minutes as the agents worked in silence, tearing apart the routine of her travel. Jasmine's thoughts shifted. Is this what it feels like? To be judged by nothing but the color of your skin? Her breath quickened, and her mind raced with the reality of what was happening. She had experienced discrimination before, but never like this. Not in a public place, not when she had done everything right, not when she had followed all the rules. This wasn't random. This wasn't just another inconvenience. This was a deliberate, targeted action, and Jasmine knew it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the second agent looked up, as though she'd just realized how long it had been. She gave Jasmine a quick, dismissive glance, and then returned her attention to the bag. "You're good to go," she said, but there was no apology, no acknowledgement of the discomfort she had caused. The words were hollow, empty. Jasmine took a slow, deliberate breath, gathering herself. She could feel the heat of anger rising, but she held it in. She wasn't going to let them see her break. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction, but inside she was shaking. Why? Why was this happening? There was no good answer, no explanation that would make this situation right. She had been humiliated, degraded, simply because of the color of her skin. And there was nothing she could do about it in this moment. As the agents walked away, Jasmine stood there for a moment longer. The bustling terminal around her faded into the background. She was alone in her thoughts, surrounded by people, but utterly isolated in her experience. Franklin stepped closer, his hand resting on her shoulder in a quiet gesture of solidarity. She met his gaze, a silent agreement between them. This wasn't over. The search was finished, but the fight was just beginning. As they walked away from the gate, Jasmine felt the weight of the eyes following her. The murmurs from the crowd were hard to ignore, but she didn't flinch. The world had just witnessed a painful reminder of how easily dignity could be stripped away, but Jasmine wasn't going to let it define her. Franklin's steady presence beside her was a quiet reassurance. They made their way through the terminal, past the still-gathering crowd, until they reached a quieter hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed softly above them, casting a cold glow on the floor beneath their feet. Jasmine stopped for a moment, taking a deep breath, and looked out the large windows that framed the runway. The world outside seemed so distant, so unaffected by the injustice that had just unfolded. Franklin, ever the calm presence, placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll get through there," he said, his voice soft but firm. Jasmine didn't respond immediately. Her mind raced with everything that had just happened: the humiliation, the frustration, the helplessness. She had fought for so long to break down barriers, to prove that a woman like her deserved respect in every room she entered. And yet this moment had felt like the world was pushing her back, trying to remind her of the obstacles still in her path. But she wouldn't let it win. "I know," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper, "but I'm tired of fighting battles that shouldn't even exist." The quiet silence between them was comforting, though it couldn't erase the sting of what had just happened. They knew the journey wasn't over. It wasn't just about one flight, one airport, one injustice. It was about the many unseen battles fought every day by those who didn't have the luxury of walking away. And Jasmine wasn't done yet. As they exited the terminal, the hum of the airport faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of their footsteps on the pavement. Franklin held the car door open for Jasmine, his face unreadable, but his eyes full of understanding. She slid into the passenger seat, still processing everything that had transpired. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the seat beside her, but she ignored it for now. She wasn't ready to dive into the flood of messages and headlines that would undoubtedly follow. Instead, she gazed out the window, watching the world move on as if nothing had changed. It had only been a few hours, yet it felt like a lifetime. Her thoughts drifted to the funeral, to Devin, and the family she was meant to be with today. But that was slipping further away as the events at the airport lingered in her mind. "Do you want to talk about it?" Franklin asked, his voice breaking the silence. Jasmine shook her head. "Not yet, I don't know how to put it into words. How can people treat someone like that? Like we don't matter?" Franklin glanced at her briefly, his voice steady as he answered. "Because they think they can. But you know better than anyone that they can't." Jasmine nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She knew this wasn't just about her. It wasn't even just about people of color or women in positions of power. This was about respect, basic human decency, and the refusal to let anyone be diminished, no matter who they were. She had stood up for herself today, but she knew this was only the beginning of something much bigger. "They'll apologize," she said quietly, almost to herself, "but it won't be enough. Not for me. Not for anyone who's ever been treated like this." Franklin didn't reply, but his hand found hers, a small but comforting gesture. Jasmine looked at him, grateful for his unwavering support. She wasn't alone in this fight, and she never would be. The news spread fast, faster than Jasmine had anticipated. Within hours, her experience at the airport became the subject of headlines across the country. On television screens, reporters spoke with a sense of urgency, and on social media, posts and comments flooded in from all corners of the nation. The buzz in the air was palpable, but it wasn't the kind of noise that made Jasmine feel seen. It was the kind of noise that made her feel like an object to be consumed, dissected, and judged. The first report came from a local station in Dallas. Congresswoman Jasmine White removed from flight after confrontation at Dallas Airport. The headline flashed across the screen with an almost clinical detachment, as if the events had been some sort of procedural misstep. Jasmine knew better. She could feel the weight of the scrutiny as her name echoed through the airwaves. Her face was everywhere now, but no one had the full story. They didn't see what she had felt, how her very dignity had been taken from her, bit by bit, as she was treated like a criminal for simply existing. Jasmine's phone buzzed constantly as the messages rolled in, many from her supporters, but just as many from the media, asking for interviews, requesting statements. The messages were flooded with support, but there was also an undercurrent of speculation. The public was eager for answers, eager to hear the next chapter in this unfolding drama. Some hailed her as a hero for standing up against what they saw as systemic injustice, while others questioned whether she had overreacted. On social media, the hashtags started rolling in. Hashtag Justice for Jasmine, hashtag End Discrimination, hashtag Respect All Voices. A collective roar filled the digital space. Activists and leaders from all over the country rallied behind her, sharing their own stories of discrimination, their own painful experiences of being treated as less than. Jasmine wasn't alone anymore. This was no longer just her fight. It had become something much larger, a fight for dignity, respect, and justice for all marginalized people. But the attention also brought with it a dark undercurrent of hatred. There were those who mocked her, who minimized her experience. Comments flooded in, attacking her character, questioning her motives, and dismissing the very real issues of racial injustice she had brought to the forefront. These voices, louder than any other, made it clear that not everyone was ready to face the uncomfortable truths she had revealed. The media outlets debated her treatment, with some giving her the benefit of the doubt, while others painted her as a troublemaker. The backlash against the TSA agents and the airline grew, but so did the divisiveness. Jasmine's experience had sparked something deeper in the public consciousness, something that had been simmering just beneath the surface for years. Conversations that were once hushed in private rooms and behind closed doors were now out in the open. The lines had been drawn. Jasmine was contacted by several prominent figures, celebrities, civil rights leaders, and politicians, offering their public support. A well-known actor shared a post about her on Instagram, calling for people to rally together. A popular journalist reached out for an exclusive interview, while a prominent activist tweeted, "Congresswoman White stands for all of us who've been silenced for too long. It's time to make our voices heard." But as the days passed, Jasmine felt the weight of this newfound responsibility. Yes, she was receiving support, but it was coming with the price of intense public scrutiny. Her every word, her every move was now being analyzed. The pressure was immense, and though she had always been strong, she couldn't deny the exhaustion. She had spoken out against injustice, and now she was the center of it all. The days that followed were a whirlwind of media attention, interviews, and public outcry. Jasmine had expected the backlash, but she hadn't anticipated the outpouring of support from communities across the nation. Social media exploded with hashtags like "Respect Jasmine" and "We End Discrimination," while news outlets debated her treatment at the airport. Her name was everywhere, on TV, in the newspapers, and all over social media. But it wasn't the headlines that mattered to her, it was the stories, the messages from ordinary people, recounting their own experiences with discrimination, their own moments of feeling invisible. Jasmine had become a symbol for so many who had been overlooked or mistreated. She wasn't just a congresswoman anymore. She was the voice of those who had been silenced for too long. The weight of her newfound role was both humbling and empowering, but it also meant that the pressure was on. She knew that now, more than ever, her actions and words would be scrutinized by the public. In the midst of all this, Franklin remained by her side, unwavering in his support. But even he could see the toll it was taking on Jasmine. The constant pressure, the eyes of the world on her, it was exhausting. Yet Jasmine knew she couldn't stop now. She had started this fight for dignity, and she wasn't about to let it fizzle out. As the weeks passed, Jasmine's resolve only grew stronger. She became a leading voice, not just in politics, but in every community where injustice and inequality persisted. She spoke at town halls, rallied for policies that would ensure no one ever felt invisible again, and shared her experience with the world, using it as a stepping stone for change. But it wasn't easy. The pressure mounted with every decision, every public appearance. And yet, through it all, she remembered what had brought her to this point, the quiet strength of standing up when no one else would. In the quiet of the evenings, when the media noise faded and she had some time to reflect, Jasmine would think about the people she was fighting for, the stories of the elderly woman who had been dismissed at a hospital, the young man who had been stopped and frisked without cause, and the countless others who had been mistreated simply because of who they were. Their faces lingered in her mind, fueling her passion. And then there was Franklin, her unwavering support. He had seen her through the darkest moments, reminding her of her worth when it felt like the world was pushing her down. He always said, true strength lies not in power, but in knowing who you are, no matter how the world treats you. One evening, as she sat by her window, reflecting on how far they had come, Jasmine made a promise to herself and to everyone who had supported her. This fight for dignity, for respect, for equality, it wasn't just her fight. It was a fight for all of us. The truth is, we all face moments where we are pushed to the edge, where we are made to feel like we don't matter. But what happens next is what defines us. Jasmine's story is not just a tale of personal triumph. It's a call to action, a reminder that we must continue fighting for what's right, for the dignity of all people, no matter their race, gender, or status. And to all of you, my fellow community members, especially those of you who have lived through decades of struggles, remember this. Every small act of standing up, every time you choose to speak out against injustice, you make a difference. It's never too late to be part of change. I ask you, take a moment today to reflect on the times you've been dismissed or ignored. Speak up for those who can't, and never let anyone tell you your voice doesn't matter. Share your story and help those around you find their voice too. The fight for respect and equality is ongoing, and together we can create a world where no one is overlooked. Let's stand up for all of us. Please leave a comment below. Share your own stories of resilience and strength. Let's support each other, because our collective voice has the power to change the world. Share this video and spread the message of dignity and respect. Together, we can make a difference.